friends, and welcome back to another video. So today I wanted to do something that is kind of a take on something I've done before. I have made a couple of videos recommending books based on your coffee orders or your cafe orders, but that was before I got my first specialty coffee job. I was a barista for a while, so I felt like I had that experience, but I'm now working in specialty coffee, and the difference between regular coffee, quote unquote, and specialty coffee is kind of complicated and nuanced, so I'm not gonna get into that too much. But all of that is to say that I now have a specialty coffee position, and my knowledge about coffee has broadened significantly, and I feel more qualified to talk about specific specialty coffees and concepts in that realm, and kind of relate those to books. So this video will be a bit of a crash course on some of the specialty coffee drinks and concepts that I'm gonna be discussing, as well as a recommendation video. So without further ado, let's get into it. All right, we're gonna start off easy with a coffee drink that you may have heard of, but it is also extremely divisive, which makes it really fun to talk about, and that is the macchiato. So the macchiato that a lot of people know of is the Starbucks macchiato, or the kind of latte-ish beverage that has a lot of caramel and vanilla in it, and it's usually made by having your milk on the bottom and your espresso on top with kind of a cross-hatch of caramel in a lot of situations. So that is the caramel macchiato, or the macchiato that most people are familiar with. And then there is the traditional macchiato, which is a shot of espresso with a little bit of steamed milk or foam on top. And this is, as I said, the traditional Italian macchiato, and that is kind of the macchiato that the specialty coffee world is familiar with. And it is very divisive because baristas have very strong opinions on the macchiato, and if someone comes into a specialty coffee shop and orders a macchiato, you kind of have to decide whether they mean a Starbucks one or a traditional one if you don't feel like asking them. I feel like every barista has a macchiato story. Mine happens to be the fact that somebody came in and asked for a traditional macchiato, and I was so excited to be able to serve that to someone because we get a lot of orders for the Starbucks style macchiato. And then I handed this guy the cup and he was like, "Can I get this to go?" And my heart just sank because I had to take this beautiful small drink that I had created and dump it into an 8-ounce cup because we don't have like 2-ounce cups. So I had to dump it in there and put a lid on it and hand it back to him, and I was so disappointed. But if you ask your local barista, they probably have a macchiato story. So it is a very divisive drink. And I was trying to decide what in the world of books is that divisive. And the only thing I could think of that I would actually recommend to you is anything by Ottessa Moshfegh. So Ottessa Moshfegh writes a lot of unlikable narrator stories. A lot of her characters are really grotesque, and her writing style is very much for shock value, seemingly, if you're not looking deeper into the themes, etc. So people find it to be really shocking, really disturbing, uncomfortable, and they just really hate it. Or they're Ottessa Moshfegh stans. So I wouldn't say that I'm a complete stan, but I did really like Eileen. This book follows a young woman who lives with her father and works at a prison, and she kind of has to figure out what she wants to do with her life, and she disappears one day, and that's not a spoiler, that's on the back of the book, but it is very much an unlikable narrator story. Eileen is really, really gross and terrible, and you can't help but find her just absolutely disgusting throughout the book. But it also speaks to the fact that we consider women who do these things to be foul and disgusting, yet if a man does them, we don't really bat an eye. So it is very much commentary on that. It is very much an unlikable narrator situation, and if you're not into that, it's very divisive. And then the other one that I like to recommend is My Year of Rest and Relaxation. This is about a young woman who is unhappy with her life and doesn't know what she wants to do, and decides to take pills in order to hibernate for a year, and is hoping that when she wakes up, she's rejuvenated and ready to move on with her life. But the main theme in this is privilege, because she is so unlikable, because she has this huge space, this huge home, people who can come check on her that she pays. She has this privilege that she's able able to sustain her livelihood and keep her home and all of these things and not work during that whole entire year. So she's very unlikable. People hate this because of the privilege. People love it because of the commentary on the privilege. It's just a really great book, in my opinion, but very divisive. So whether you're a Starbucks macchiato drinker or a traditional macchiato drinker, you'll probably really like the Ottessa Moshfegh books, or you'll really hate them, depending on what side you fall on. But that's my recommendation for the macchiato. Easing into some more specialty coffee language, we have the cortado. So the cortado is a pretty small drink. It's usually about 4 ounces, and it's 2 ounces of espresso and 2 ounces of steamed milk. It's served hot and usually in some kind of glass vessel like a Gibraltar glass. And they're very pretty and very punchy. Because there is milk in it as opposed to just a shot of espresso, it's not gonna be as punchy. So you get the flavor of the espresso that comes through very strongly, but it is a little bit more coating and more sippable than a shot of espresso would be. So for that, I wanted to recommend a book that is very short and concise and condensed, but is easier to get through than if you were to just read about the topic. And that is This Is Pleasure by Mary Gateskill. So this book is about the Me Too movement, and it covers a situation in an office space with a man named Quinn, who is maybe the CEO, I don't remember, of this company, but he's in charge and he is able to get away with a lot of things that he really should not be able to get away with because the women are afraid to speak up because he is so controlling, and he is able to change and alter their careers forever depending on whether they're likable to him or not. So we see the perspective of Quinn as well as a woman who is affected by his actions, and another woman who is supporting him and is trying to advocate for him during all of the happenings. So it's a very punchy book. It's very small. It is very concise in terms of what it's trying to get across and the themes it's trying to convey, but it's much more readable and digestible than just reading some kind of statistics about how often this happens and trying to get through the information in that way. So this, to me, is a very good book to recommend for a cortado because it is small but punchy, but not as punchy as reading a fact sheet or drinking a shot of espresso, respectively. So that is my recommendation for a cortado. Okay, so moving right along, we're gonna talk about a drink called the Americano. So you may not have heard of this because it is kind of more of an internet thing than it is an in-person coffee shop thing. I haven't really seen it at any in-person coffee shops besides the one that I work at. But it is basically an Americano, which is espresso and water, but instead of it being hot or necessarily iced, what we do is we add espresso to ice and water, and then we steam it for a few seconds to create aeration and to remove all of the ice, but it is still a cold beverage. So it is basically this cold, espresso forward beverage with a layer of foam on top. It is silky and delicious, and it's kind of an innovative take on an old idea. An Americano traditionally is an approximation of drip coffee using espresso. So it is a bit of an older concept, but the Americano is just taking that concept and making it new and innovative and interesting. And I wanted to recommend a book that I felt embodied that same idea. And that is All's Well by Mona Awad. So this is one of my favorite books ever, honestly. I found it to be super interesting and innovative and different. So this is about a woman named Miranda who used to be an actress, and she hurt herself and now has chronic pain and ended up being a teacher at a college. And she's a theater teacher. So she's trying to get her students to put on the play All's Well That Ends Well. And it is super trippy and weird, and there's a lot of representation of chronic pain. I like this book for a million different reasons, but it is a new and fresh and innovative take on All's Well That Ends Well, which is a very old work. And it's not necessarily a retelling, but it uses All's Well That Ends Well in a modern context to create a really interesting and innovative story. So I think this is the perfect book to pair with the Americano. All right, now we're really in specialty coffee territory. story. So I wanted to recommend a book for you for pour-overs. So pour-overs are kind of a general term. There are many different types of pour-overs. You can make a hot pour-over or a flash brew, which is making a pour-over that's directly over ice, so it instantly chills it and you have this delicious iced coffee drink. Pour-overs can also be made with various different devices. There's a million different pour-over devices out there. But the basic idea of a pour-over is that you're creating drip or filter coffee that is most of the time a single serving. And because you are measuring everything so precisely, you're measuring your amount of coffee and water, you're timing your pours, you get a very precise brew method, and you're able to highlight a lot of the nuanced flavors of a specialty coffee that way, as opposed to just throwing it in a regular coffee machine and hitting brew. If you're somebody who orders or enjoys a pour over, you're looking for the beauty in simplicity. Pour overs are kind of made to be consumed black, so you're not adding anything to it. So you're really trying to experience the nuances of that coffee. And because it's so dialed back and simple, it's just black coffee, you really have to appreciate the flavors and nuances of the coffee in order to enjoy the experience. This makes a very simple beverage feel really special and unique and different. So for this concept, I wanted to recommend Bluets by Maggie Nelson. So on the surface, this book seems really simplistic. All it is a list. It's got like 200 and something little bullet points that are little paragraphs. And it's just a list of things that Maggie Nelson wants to write about relating to the color blue. So it feels really simplistic on the surface, but as you dive into it, you see there are so many more themes talked about. There's grief and love and loss, and many allusions to philosophy and many other concepts that you wouldn't necessarily associate with a color. When you read this, you really have to spend time with it to appreciate all of the creative and interesting things that Maggie Nelson is doing in this book. And that's how I feel about pour-overs. If you're really going to enjoy a pour-over, you are gonna have to spend some time sitting with it, thinking about it, understanding it, and trying to have an experience, not so much just drinking a cup of coffee. And with this book, it is about the experience and spending time with the book rather than just finishing a book. So Bluets by Maggie Nelson is my recommendation for a pour-over. And then finally, we have the sort of final frontier in specialty coffee concepts and drinks, and that is a natural anaerobic coffee. So that might not ring a bell for you, and I'm just gonna explain what that means. There's a few types of processing methods for coffees. So one of the processing methods is a wash process, which means that when the coffee is picked, it is depulped and the coffee is kind of washed, and that creates a lot less fruity forward flavors. It creates more clean and balanced flavors. Whereas if you have a naturally processed coffee, the coffee is dried inside of the fruit and it creates more winey and fruity kind of characteristics to the coffee. Anaerobic processing is basically a fermentation process. So if you have a natural anaerobic coffee, you're going to have a coffee that is dried in its cherry and also fermented. So these two things together create really, really interesting wine-like characteristics and really fruity forward coffees. So all of that is to say that this coffee is, or at least was at one point, a very innovative and interesting technique. Naturally processed coffees have been around forever, but anaerobic processing is a bit newer and it is much more of a buzzword nowadays. However, as specialty coffee continues to grow and expand, we keep getting new processing methods and new innovations for processing, and anaerobic is not all that unique or interesting anymore. There are a million different processing methods that have come out since anaerobic has become a thing, and it's no longer this hugely new and innovative thing. And that's not to say that anaerobic isn't a special kind of processing method. It's just not as much of a buzzword now as it was 10 years ago. And for this, I want to recommend Kim Ji-young, born 1982, by Cho Nam Ju. So this takes a bit of explanation to kind of draw the connection, but I'm gonna walk you through my thought process. So this is about a young woman in South Korea who is kind of the baseline average woman, if that's even a thing. Basically, she just experiences all of the different things that an average woman in South Korea might experience. So we read about her life from childhood all the way through later adulthood, and we see the experiences that she has with men throughout that period. So we see all of the sexism and misogyny that she experiences throughout her life. The idea is that she could be anyone because these experiences are universal. So the English kind of equivalent would be that she's kind of a Jane Doe and that she is a stand-in for women at large. So what makes this book really innovative is that all of the kind of stories and claims that are being made about Kim Ji-young's life are actually cited, which kind of sounds weird to say because it is a fiction book. So how can you cite something in a fiction book? But what the author has done is actually find studies and articles about the experiences that Kim Ji-young has and actually cites those real life things throughout the book. So as readers, you're able to see that these things aren't made up. They're actual experiences that women have had, and the author is kind of compiling those experiences into a fiction book. So I remember when this first came out, people thought that it was so innovative and different, and people were talking about it a lot because of that concept of mixing fiction and nonfiction in this way. It felt really innovative and new and interesting, and nobody had ever really done that before. So the fact that it was a translated book with that concept made everyone feel like it was really special. And it is special. I really like this book, but it has become much more of a mainstream book now that it's become popular. So that's kind of where I'm drawing the comparison between this book and Natural Anaerobic Coffees. They're both really interesting and dynamic, but they've become much more of a household name in their respective kind of subcultures. So this is the book that I would recommend for a natural anaerobic coffee drinker. So I hope that wasn't too much information and too overwhelming for you, but I really wanted to share some of the specialty coffee themes and ideas and drinks that I'm really interested in right now and pair them up with some books, because honestly, watching my past videos where I recommend books based on coffee drinks makes me cringe a little bit because there's so many things I didn't know about back then, and honestly several things that I kind of just claimed that were not entirely true in the broader world of coffee. So I'm really glad that I'm more educated now and I can give you guys some better recommendations. And if you are a specialty coffee person, hi, I'm really glad to see you here. I'd really like to do some more specialty coffee related things on this channel, so let me know if you have any ideas or things you want me to talk about in the coffee world. And also for my book people, have you read any of these books? Did you enjoy them? If you guys want me to do yet another book recommendation based on coffee orders, let me know, and totally put your coffee orders in the comments below because I will do another video if you guys have coffee orders you want recommendations for. But anyway, if you enjoyed this video, feel free to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.